Hello everyone, I forgot to mention something. I'm actually teaching a workshop for the Santa Fe workshops, and it is called Self-Publishing for Photographers, Books to Zines. This is going to be on May 25th and May 27th. There's two-hour sessions from 6 to 8 p.m. Mountain Time here in the United States. The first session is really going to be about strategy for self-publishing. So it's going to talk about trim sizes and a little bit about materials and a little bit about software, a lot about case studies, why print is important, how to use it, how to strategize when you're self-publishing. And I can show tons of examples of projects that I've done and other people have done that are fun, interesting, and may spark an idea in your head. The second session is really about software. We're going to talk primarily about Blurb Bookright, and then I can also walk through the Adobe InDesign plugin, which is a plugin that allows you to, that sort of syncs together with Blurb. And again, that's May 25th and May 27th. And I thought I would at least mention it, and I'll link it below in case this sounds interesting or appealing to any of you. I don't want to throw the deuce. I want to throw the heat. I want to establish my presence with authority. Another obscure movie reference. I think these are going to become part of my channel from here on out. So I'm back in the van and I have another Q&A film that I'm doing, but I also want to give you a heads up on a couple of different films that I am going to start working on. I'm going to start a series about portraiture, and I thought about this morning on my bike ride. I think portraiture is a wonderful tool that works as a wonderful entry into being a documentary photographer. I think portraiture is something that you can work on virtually anywhere. And I think the skills that you develop when you're making portraits are skills that apply to documentary photography very, very, very well. So I'm going to start something called Anatomy of a Portrait. I'm just going to walk through portraits. And then I have another film series that I'm going to start, which is a lot of people have asked for, but I was intending on doing it anyway, which is basically about images that didn't work. So images that were close, but no cigar. And I think that obviously I have far more of those than I do images that work. So I will have no shortage of bad images to show you. I could call it, I suck at photography. Because I think there probably are a lot of people, like the photo editor that threw a stapler at me when I didn't even work for him. That guy probably thought I sucked at photography. So I got up this morning and I got on my bike with a friend and we rode like 17 miles and just took it slow and easy. And I walked out of the house and it was about 35 degrees. I could see my breath. I was putting a bottle on my bike. I looked around, the sun was coming up. It's beautiful. And I just thought, what a fantastic world we live in. And I think there's a lot of really awful things happening in the world pretty much all the time. I think that that's partly is human nature, partly bad luck, and partly maybe bad decisions over the years. But like my heart goes out to the people in India right now, what's happening in India with COVID. It just looks grim. It pains me to see people like that, or people in that situation. But the world is a pretty fantastic place. And some of the things that we're going to talk about on my podcast upcoming and on these films is sometimes if you spend a lot of time in the internet culture, online culture, you can often think that everything is bad, or it's easy to fall into that trend of kind of, I hate everything. And I think that's a very unhealthy place to be. And when you walk outside in the morning and you see what this amazing world is we live in, we should remain on a positive front. You know what I mean? Okay, let's move on. Thank you to everybody who sent questions. I'm one person with one opinion. Just keep that in mind. I think my opinions are what I would call potentially atypical for the photography and book publishing world. And I think that's maybe why they're interesting or potentially valid, is that I've been around this for a long time and I've seen and heard and done weird things, people. Weird. I heard you couldn't hit water if you fell out of a boat. Crash Davis. Even if you don't like baseball, you got to watch Bull Durham. That's a really good script. Okay. The first 3 questions are going to be out of right field. I've been asked about these a million times and I've somehow and for some reason avoided talking about them. And I'm only going to touch very, very briefly on some of these because they're incredibly complex issues that I really could spend all day talking about. And like I've mentioned before, I have a lot of interests outside of books and photography. But the first question was about politics. I get a lot of people asking me about my politics. I don't really want to go into politics in detail. I do not identify completely with either American political party. I think our political system is broken. I think it's been broken for a long time, and I don't think it really serves the best interest of the people. I think we have We have been radicalized politically in America to identify with party over things like truth and math and science and fact. And so I think it's not helpful, and it's driving us apart. And I think if you identify 100% with either American political party, you are ignoring decades and decades of less than flattering information about the people that we have elected to these parties. The American political system is a minefield. I think it ebbs and flows. I think both parties, if you strip away the crazy politics associated with each party has interesting agendas and policies and plans. But what's happened with the sort of crazy radicalization of our political system, again, is a total turnoff to me. So I don't really identify with either party, and I'll just leave it with that. The only political tests I've ever taken were back in high school and college, and I always tested as an independent, which I think makes me a communist. Alrighty then. Okay, question number 2 was about what have I learned during C-19, COVID-19. I have learned a lot. I think some of these lessons have been hard-earned, lumpy, like getting your friend slugging you in the arm in high school and leaving a giant welt on your arm. There's been a few of those. And there's also been some things that I have looked at on a personal level and said, I want to change this about myself. I do not want to live the life I was living prior to COVID. I looked at COVID and said, this is an unbelievable opportunity to learn a new way of navigating the world. I am 52 years old. I have never had to quarantine in my life. So I am not one of these people that says I deserve something or I demand something or I am owed something because I spent a year in quarantine. I love quarantine. I would do another year in a heartbeat without even skipping a beat. A lot of people can't. A lot of people couldn't, and they were much more on the front lines for me, so I have to take into perspective that these folks had a really rough time. I don't want to live my life that way, how I was living it prior to COVID. I look at COVID and said, what can I learn from this, and how do I improve my situation and also the situation around me? 75% of all the business travel I was doing is unnecessary. There is no reason for Uncle Dano to get on a plane every week and fly somewhere for business. We've learned over the past year that Zoom calls work perfectly well for a huge percentage of that. I can, on the flip side, see a couple of times a year where it would be beneficial for people to be together in person, especially for, let's take, for example, our company. Blurb was acquired 5 or 6 months ago. I have not personally met any of the management from the new company. So it would be beneficial as a company to be able to merge us together at some point in time in a physical space where we can all get to know one another. That makes sense to me. But flying up to go to meetings, traveling like that, it's wasteful and is sort of what I call PC-19, pre-COVID-19 thinking. Also, on a personal travel level, I feel like I was traveling internationally and traveling on planes far too much. I live in a state, New Mexico, that is a completely unique place in the United States. There is no other place like this. There is no culture elsewhere in the United States like this. I do not know a single person who lives here that has explored this entire state. Not one. In fact, a lot of the people that I know who've lived here don't really know much about the state. In fact, some of them don't really know much outside of about 20 minutes outside of Santa Fe. I look at New Mexico and what's here, and I think to myself, I could never leave here for the rest of my life and never come close to exploring the whole thing. So do I need to keep getting on planes and flying to foreign countries and doing that? I personally do not think so. That's a part of my life I'm going to stop. I'm going to change that. The only trip that I have in the works between now and the end of the year is to Albania to teach a photography workshop. So I have a purpose for going there, but even that's a little flimsy if I wanted to put the screws to it, people. So do I need to get on a plane to go to Albania? No. Do I want to go and teach people bookmaking? Yes. Can I build on the project that I did before? Yes. But still, like, I still feel a little bit greedy with this whole thing. And I think to myself, okay, if I do one trip this year, and by the way, there's the likelihood of this happening is still completely up in the air. We do not know what's happening with variants and the COVID situation at that time, but we have until September, so we've got some time to analyze. We're thinking positively, but the reality is it may or may not work. So that's what I learned from COVID-19. The third question is about Apple. It's about Apple computers. A lot of people have reached out and asked me what kind of computers I use, and I think you will find this funny. Now, luckily, people have asked me what kind of computer I use, but no one, and I repeat, no one was crazy enough to ask me how to use a computer. because I am legendary. I am not a tech guy. I'm not a geeky guy. I'm not a computer guy, even though I use them all day, every day. I would never classify myself as that. And also, my body puts off a death ray that kills all electronics. So you don't even want me around your computer. We had a art director at Blurb named Alex Palacios, who I love, and I'm hoping that she's going to be a part of AG23 issue 3. And Alex and I had the same computer because Blurb gives us computers. And I would sit and watch her, like we would do meetings every now and then. And we had the same laptop, same computer. But what she did, what that computer did in her hands, didn't even look like the same thing. Just how she navigated around the computer. I was like, do I have the same computer? I just felt like that sick wildebeest that's wandering too close to the river filled with crocs. And the kids are going, Dad, get away from the river. And then it's too late and the croc takes him down for the death roll. That's kind of how I felt around Alex when she's on her computer. So I've been an Apple person for a long time, but however, during my entire adult life of using Apple, I had stretches of 4 or 5 years where I was also using PC for work. Kodak years, it was the IBM StinkPad, and they would crack and explode like every 6 months, and you would send it in. They would get these things called the blue screen of death, and then you would just tell Kodak, I got the blue screen of death, and then another laptop would show up and you would ship the other one back. And I liked the ThinkPad. It had a great keyboard, but I've primarily been an Apple person, but I am not an Apple fanboy person, and I'm not beyond looking at the realities of some of the issues I've had with Apple in the past. I bought a MacBook that came with a faulty hard drive. I bought an iMac G5 that had a faulty power supply. I bought a Mac Tower that had a problem they admitted was there, but they didn't know how to fix it, that I had for the entire length of the computer. And so I've had issues with Apple all along. My iPhone 12 came with a bad battery and a bad antenna, had to be replaced. It goes on and on and on. But I do think Apple deserves a lot of credit for their innovation, and I'm very keen on using and trying the new M1s because, and here's where we get to my computers now, my current computers. So right before the Apples came out, finally Blurb said to me, look, we need to replace your old laptop, which was from 2015, the last one that had all the ports. It was fantastic. And if I could get that computer back now, I would take it because the ports alone, I'll get to in a minute. So they replaced my laptop with the latest version, the last version of the Intel pre-M1 Apples. And I'm like, I'm a superstar. This thing's going to be perfect. It's going to be super fast. I'm going to be ripping out YouTube films right and left. And then I get the thing, and this is my first Apple without ports. And so I'm looking at this dongle situation, and I'm like, this is the dumbest thing I've ever seen. I have to have 4 dongles with me at all times, and one of the dongles has like 17 ports on it. And I still am swapping these things out all day long, plus I have to carry all these things. And in my head, I'm like, man, when I get on a plane to go somewhere, if I'm doing an actual shoot, I gotta have doubles of everything, which means I'm gonna have to carry 3, 4 dongles to make sure. Can you imagine sitting in front of a client at a job and your dongle goes bad? And you go, I don't have an extra dongle. And they're like, this whole thing, this entire shoot, all this money, all this production, all this camera gear is hinged on this one crappy piece of equipment that's a dongle. That is a absolutely terrifying bottleneck, and it's just a bad design, right? I think Apple went above, Apple said, look, we're gonna put design aesthetic over functionality, and I think they caught a ration from a lot of people. So I've heard rumblings that they're gonna start bringing some of these ports back. But the other thing about this new laptop is the battery lasts less than an hour. On a full charge, if I have nothing running and I even try to upload a YouTube film, the battery will be dead in less than an hour. So it is a completely useless laptop unless I am near a power supply, which defeats the purpose of having a laptop. And lastly, the keyboard sucks. I shouldn't say lastly. Keyboard sucks. Spacebar is ridiculous. I've never used it. The touch bar, why anyone would use that, I have no idea. It just seems like a complete gimmick. And also, if I do anything on this Mac laptop, the fan kicks on. So, and it's loud, so I can't record in that room, or I couldn't record in the van if that laptop was in here right now. So it's, in my opinion, I would rank my new laptop as a D. On a scale of A to F, I would give it a D. And I'm super stoked about trying an M1 because everyone I talked to says that these problems are eliminated except for the port thing. Now, the funny part is I also have about an 8-year-old trash can Macintosh that Blurb also sent me. So I have to reiterate, I would never seriously complain about this stuff because I'm not paying for these computers. They're work computers. They're assigned to me. I use them for X amount of time. They asked for them back. They replace them with something else. I haven't had to buy a computer in 11 years. So I'm completely fortunate in that way. I just think it's funny because I have such a horrible record with anything electronic. surviving in my clearly flawed presence. So I have a Mac trash can. And I actually love it. I don't have it connected to anything. It's not connected to the internet. It is just, the only thing on it is the Adobe Suite, and I only use it for Premiere and Photoshop, and that's it. And it works fairly well. It's 8 years old, and at the time, God knows how much they spent on this thing. It was probably, I'm guessing, a $10,000 or $12,000 computer. Now, I don't think it's worth much of anything. There's a lot of like sort of port incompatibility, and it doesn't like 4K. It doesn't like my 360 camera. And so there's things that it really has trouble. Callouts in Premiere take forever to render. And so it's tricky, but I'm not complaining. That way I have one system that's devoted to making the films, and the laptop, and another monitor, which is the constant daily beehive of activity that you're like, I'm doing email and Google Docs and Excel spreadsheets and communicating in Slack and all that stuff. And you're like, what happened to my life? What happened? How do I get it back? Calgon, take me away. That's it. Now we're going to move on to the other questions. Question number, 4. And I'm going to have to divide this as well. I thought I could get through all of these, but I don't think I can because I think I'm at 15 minutes already. Hijo. Okay. Question number 4. I hope you're well. My desire is to create a black and white photo book. It will be my first book endeavor. That's exciting in itself to think back to when I was making my first book, which was, I think, 1993. I have my own unique photos and accompanying text in rough form. I've researched what a professional book designer would cost, and it's a bit out of my price range for the time being. Would you have any tips for someone with a very limited budget who wants to create a professional-looking photo book? Did I already answer this question? Why does that sound so familiar to me? Did I already? And that was from Rommel, which is a cool name, by the way. Book designers are expensive. Full-time publication designers are expensive. That's what they do for a living. And when you see the work that they produce, you're like, wow, that's way better than anything that I would be able to do. So they're definitely worth their value, but I understand the fact that a lot of us don't have the budget to hire a full-time book designer. There is a company called Reedsy, R-E-E-D-S-Y, that I swear I've answered this question. And that's my fault if I have, but you're getting it again. So Reedsy is a place that have vetted professionals that you can reach out to see if someone can help with cover design, book design, whatever designs you have in mind. That's a good option. And there are other sites where you can pay just an absolutely nominal fee. And sometimes you're going to get good work and sometimes you may not, because when you're paying so little money for something, you just can't really complain. You don't know. You could get somebody very good and vetted, or someone that's just maybe not that skilled. That's what I would do. Question number 5. This is a good question. How do you go about choosing a film format for a project? I recently got myself a Rolly and I use it for anything and everything, completely neglecting my 35mm cameras. When would you choose 35 over 120 and vice versa? I think that's from Leon. That's a really good question, Leon, but it's a pretty simple answer. And the answer is, right as I said simple, I was like, it's probably not that simple. Probably simple, sounds simple to me because my 17 brain cells are like, you can do this. It's based on subject matter because how quickly is it moving? The Hasselblad is really slow. You're not going to shoot follow focus of, some sort of athletic event or fast moving news situation. To hit that with a Hasselblad, you're going to need some luck. That's going to be really slow. So if I'm shooting something quickly and I need fast imagery, I need more frames on a roll of film because I don't have time to reload, I'm going to look at the 35. And if I'm going to shoot something that's much slower, that might be a little bit more ethereal, that might be a little bit less action, more time to compose imagery, then I would think about 120. I often worked in tandem with both of those systems for that specific reason. I would develop a theme for the Hasselblad and I would develop a theme for the 35mm, the Leica. And I would just work on 2 simultaneous themes that were related to the same project. Now there's an upside to that and a downside. The upside is it's easier because that Hasselblad tricks you into thinking that you're making good work when you're often just shooting rather mundane imagery. But the 6x6 negative is so beautiful, it makes you think these are really good. Often they're not. And the 35 sometimes doesn't look real sexy. 35 Tri-X and you're shooting and everybody's got like 79 megapixel behemoths that have, 17 million colors and you're like, oh, my stuff sucks because it's 35 black and white. And the Hasselblad's like, oh, Hasselblad's over here like, It's okay, it's okay, just use me a couple of times and you'll think you're good again. And then the is like, no, you pretty much suck and you've got another roll of film to prove it. And that's like $37 of film and scanning and processing and you just blew it again, loser. And the Hasselblad's like, it's okay, we're buddies, you're okay, you're my hero. That's how it works. Hasselblad is slow. 12 frames on a roll of 120, slow focus, eye level finder, and there's, again, those are the exact reasons I love the Hasselblad, but it's not good for anything fast moving. Number 3, Dan, thank you for taking time to create these videos and capture your thoughts. I've really appreciated these videos since you started them. In this video, you mentioned reducing travel, and it got me thinking about a topic I'd love for you to address in a Q&A down the road. Continuously shrinking the geographical boundaries of a project until it becomes hyper-local. For example, you might start with shooting projects within your state and move on to your city, then your street, then your yard, then one room of your home, and so on. Perhaps this idea can be summed up in a more punk rock statement. I like that. Think globally, shoot locally. If that helps get my point across. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Yes, I just talked about thinking what COVID has made me reassess, which is getting on planes and traveling for no apparent reason other than like sort of selfish reasons. So years ago, I was living in California. I was kind of miserable. I never really identified with Southern California culture. I grew up in the country, so Southern California to me was very crowded, very expensive, kind of sterile. And I was like, I just, I don't really want to live here. My wife loved it and her job was there, so I made a sacrifice. And so one day I was sitting at my house in Orange County and I was watching planes take off from John Wayne Airport. And I was found myself a bit jealous. I was like, I wonder who's on that plane and I wonder where they're going and why am I not on that plane? And I'm a loser, I'm a spastic nerf bag and I'm never gonna get on a plane and blah, blah, blah. And then I kind of said to myself, 1, stop feeling sorry for yourself, stop complaining. And 2, if you were good, you could do a project right here at the house. And so I started a project called Homework. And I took the Hasselblad and Tri-X and I made a project at the house called Homework and I made a book from it. And there's probably like 6 images from that project that I really like. And there's, I would say, 6 images from that project that other people have looked at, other photographer related people, and have said, hey, this is a really nice little collection of images. So I think I had some success, but it was exactly to your point. And I'll give you another example. The first sort of magazine I ever made was in 1995. My friend Paul Giroux, or 95 or 96. I had been to Cambodia and done a project, and I'd been to Guatemala and done a project, and I'd been somewhere else, and I did this oversized magazine, this laminated magazine, and I remember sending these out to all the magazines I wanted to work for, including National Geographic. So I send one of these to National Geographic, and their photo editor at the time wrote me a handwritten full-page letter. And he said, number 1, we've never seen a portfolio like this. You're the first person to like put something like this in front of us. How did you do this? This is kind of the future. And that's what led me to self-publish all the time. But he also said something else. He said, look, you don't have to go to Cambodia and you don't have to go to Guatemala and you don't have to go anywhere else. You should be doing these projects in your own neighborhood. And I was like, yeah, I've heard that before and I'll probably hear it again. And it's probably true. It just seems harder. It's more difficult, because these other places are exotic and everywhere you look, it's some exotic looking thing. How many books at Blurb are about travel through Africa or India? And these are what I would call prosumer photographers who are going on vacation to these places and they're photographing exotic stuff. Myanmar is another place I've seen a lot of content and work from. Thailand, Cambodia, those places. And so it's easy to think that you have to do that to make a good project. And I love, for example, Trent Park, the Magnum photographer, because I think, and I don't know this for certain because I haven't researched it, but it looks to me like 99.9% of all his work is Australian based, which is where he's from. And I have a huge appreciation for that, which is why I've been working on a project in New Mexico for years, because it just feels like an onion. I can never get through the layers of this project, but it's important. All right, question number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 is, and this is a complicated one. How do I find funding for my projects? Well, I wish I had an easy answer for you, but I don't, because the first question you have to ask yourself, and this is going to hurt a little bit. This is going to be like a Chuck Norris, right in the neck punch. The first question is, are you good enough to even ask someone for funding? because I have a sinking suspicion there's a lot of people out there that are, I know there are, trying to ask for money that don't really deserve to be asking for money. Look at Kickstarter. Look at how many people are trying to fund projects that you kind of go, this just looks like a whim, a project that you want to go, you know, you want to go surfing through Baja and you're going to ask people for money to go surfing through Baja. When did that happen? Like that's nuts. So you have to ask yourself, is this really a good project? And what's the benefit of this? And why would someone invest in my project? Me personally, and I learned this a long time ago, and this was a hard pill to swallow. Hard nut, hard pill, whatever. You get my point. I don't want funding. I don't want to work for someone else doing a project. When you work for a client doing a project, it's not your project anymore. It's yours and it's theirs. And the people who are pulling the strings financially have a very predictable habit of trying to put their fingers in this and turn it into something that makes sense for them, not necessarily for you. So I realized a long time ago, I would rather make my money shooting commercial photography work, take that money and fund my own projects at my own time in my own way, because I cannot stand clients who know nothing about photography telling me how to do a project, who've never done a project. And so I was like, oh, and plus no one's going to give you the time required anymore. I remember even before I stopped shooting editorial work, to get a multi-day assignment for editorial was kind of a big deal. Everything was single day, and most of the time single day meant you might have a couple hours to make pictures and that was it. And to get a multi-day, you were like, I'm a superstar. And so thinking about the kind of projects I do now, I don't know how I would get funding or why I would even want it, because it just sucks kind of the fun out of it. The other thing is to look for, if you are bent on getting funding, I would, for the most part, I would forget all about camera companies, film companies, any photo related company, forget about it, because they're going to give funding to the squeaky wheel. They're driven by social media numbers. It's evident by who gets equipment and who's sponsored in the photo communities now. It's really odd. You see a truly odd group of people that are sponsored. Not all, but there's a lot of people that you look at and go, this person doesn't know the first thing about making photographs, but what they're really good at is building following on social. So that I would just blow that off, forget about it. And plus, these companies get bombarded by people asking for stuff. I know, because I worked at Kodak. I would look for organizations, corporations, and people that have indirect connection to your story that do not know they have indirect connection to your story. A lot of organizations and corporations have funding put aside every year for tax purposes, so they can write off for tax purposes funding for projects. They have investment arms. They have divisions that are sponsorship divisions. And I would reach out and say, look, you know, you guys are impacted, whatever. New Mexico, the drought in New Mexico. There could be a company in New Zealand that makes pumping equipment for underground wells that has no idea that the situation is happening here, that has no connection to it. And I remember, I'll give you this, and the last thing I'll say about this. Years ago, back in the 90s, I was living in California and I was in San Diego, and someone said to me, do you know so-and-so? I said, no. They go, oh, he's a stock agency, photo stock agency director, and he lives here in San Diego and you should meet him. So I did. I went to his house. And I walk in and he's got this bank of computers and he is looking at transparencies on a light table and he's scanning these things in. And a stock photographer in San Diego had photographed a kayaker in the harbor in San Diego. And the directive of the photographer was to show that, you could tell the mission statement of the photographer was, I'm going to show kayaking in the San Diego harbor. It was like an adventure sport ad. But this director looks at it and he picks up the phone, he starts making phone calls. He's going online and he's searching businesses. And what he sees in that photo is not the kayaker. He sees a tugboat in the background. And on the tugboat is a winch. And he's calling the winch manufacturer of the tugboat. And I was like, oh, there's a whole different level. Then he just dissected that photograph looking at brands that were associated that had nothing to do with kayaking, adventure sport, paddling. These were brands with money. What architect, you know, is responsible for the building in the background? What boat manufacturer, what winch maker, all of these things. And it really opened my mind to, like, I'm too myopic. If I'm looking for funding, I have to go after the people that have money, that have the budgets, who are the decision makers. Okay. This is a great question that came in. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, maybe 8th question. Someone wrote in and said, look, I'm never going to be great. And right now I'm not very good at all. I'm a novice. I just want to get a little bit better. Just a little bit. That's all I'm asking for. And I was like, oh my God, how refreshing is that? So we're all like, I want to be famous. I want to get rich. I want to 5,000, 5 million, 100, 600 million $1,000 man, followers and subscribers. That was so refreshing to just hear someone say, look, man, I need to refine a little bit. I just want to get a little bit better. So number one is practice. Photography is a skill. It's like anything else. I mean, if I don't ride my bike for 10 days and then I try to get on and do a hard ride, I feel out of shape. And photography is the same way. I shoot so infrequently now. If I was to go in the field, if like something happened and someone came to me right now and said, we have an amazing assignment for you, we want you to go and do this. The first probably 2 days, I would be fumbling in the field. I would see all the photographs that I should have made, but I wasn't fast enough to make because I'm not in photo shape. So you want to get in photo shape. And that takes, in my opinion, it takes photographing basically every day. The same system. I mean, when I started as an intern at a newspaper, I was supposed to be there for 3 months. I stayed for 1.5 years. I shot Fujichrome 100 on assignment every day for 1.5 years. Every single day on assignment. And it could have been a flood. It could have been a forest fire, a celebrity funeral, a police DPS funeral, politics, high school sport, everything. And I was every day, all day with a camera in my hand, shooting the same film, the same system. And that allowed me to understand light, timing, and composition. It allowed me to understand if I roll up on a scene and 2 other photographers roll up on a scene, people that I know, why is my work different from theirs? Why is their work different from mine? Because they are practiced and refined enough to know what they're looking for. And that just takes practice. The second thing, and a little caveat I will add here, is do not share this in real time. Do not put it on social media. Do not put it out and ask for praise. Wait till you have something to say. Wait till you have a comprehensive project. You've got 6, 8, 10, 15 images that are cohesive as a body of work. Then go try to find somebody who has a training and understanding of what good photography is to give you direction, whether that's finding a mentor, taking a workshop, something along those lines. And I think you will be amazed at how quickly you progress if you put the time in to practice. It's fun. It's really fun, people. I'm going to stop and start. I was going to keep going, but there's a new sheriff in town, and his name is Reggie Hammond. Y'all be cool. I was going to start and keep going, but I'm not. That's 30 minutes. That's obnoxious. It's long. No one's going to watch this. I think I can probably tell in the analytics how quickly people jump off of these calls. So I'm going to leave it at 30 and go from there. I appreciate you sending in questions. I still have a lot, probably enough for 2 more of these. If you have questions, just send them in anywhere. Thank you for doing that. Thank you. Remember, it is a beautiful day wherever you are, whether it's raining or snowing or storming or wherever. Appreciate the good aspects of what we have. Don't draw lines in the sand. Reach out to your arch enemy and say, hey, let's work it out. Let's talk it out, and let's make this a better place.